It was a war no one admitted existed, a war without medals, without public speeches, without even a name. For nearly a decade, as the Vietnam conflict burned on television screens, another war raged in the shadows just across the border in the small, mountainous country of Laos. There, under jungle canopies and low clouds, the CIA fought a conflict that officially never happened. This was the Secret War, America's invisible front in Southeast Asia, where maps were redrawn in secret, alliances made in whispers, and entire villages vanished beneath the roar of B-52 bombers. The land between wars. Laos in the early 1960s was a quiet, landlocked nation, shaped by misty mountains and the slow rhythm of the Mekong River. To the outside world, it seemed a world apart from the Cold War. But to Washington, Laos was geography with consequences. Running through its jungles was a lifeline known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a network of hidden paths, tunnels, and supply routes that North Vietnam used to move troops and weapons into South Vietnam. To the Pentagon, that trail was the enemy's bloodstream. To destroy it, they needed to control Laos. But there was a problem. Under international law, specifically, the 1962 Geneva Accords, Laos was declared neutral. No foreign troops, no outside interference. So the US couldn't legally send in its army. That didn't stop them. 2. The CIA steps in. When soldiers couldn't go, the Central Intelligence Agency did. Washington gave the order, stop the communists, but do it quietly. Thus began one of the largest covert operations in American history. The man chosen to run it was Bill Lair, a soft-spoken CIA officer fluent in Thai, who understood that to fight in Laos, the agency needed the Laotians themselves. So he turned to a small ethnic group, the Hmong people, mountain dwellers with fierce independence and deep loyalty to their land. Leading them was a man who would become a legend, General Vang Pao, a charismatic Hmong officer in the Royal Lao Army. Vang Pao agreed to fight the communists on America's behalf, but in return, he wanted weapons, training, and protection for his people. The CIA promised him all of it. 3. The war that wasn't. At first, the operation looked more like a rescue mission than a war. Small planes, often flown by civilian pilots working for a CIA-owned airline called Air America, dropped food, medicine, and ammunition into mountain villages. Then came rifles. Then mortars. Then bombers. What started as a handful of advisors grew into a full-scale secret army, more than 30,000 Hmong fighters, all trained, supplied, and paid by the United States. The CIA called it paramilitary assistance. Everyone else called it what it was, war. By 1965, the jungles of Laos thundered daily with the sound of explosions. The U.S. Air Force began bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail, officially claiming the strikes were inside Vietnam, not Laos. Between 1964 and 1973, the U.S. dropped over 2 million tons of bombs on Laos, more than were dropped on Germany and Japan during all of World War II. Every 8 minutes, for 9 years, a plane released its payload. And yet, no one in America knew. 4. Life in the shadows. For the Hmong people, life became a blur of violence and loss. Children carried ammunition belts instead of books. Villages were burned, rebuilt, and burned again. When the CIA's small field bases were overrun, Hmong soldiers were told to fight to the last man. And they did, often without knowing exactly what communism meant. American officers rotated in and out of Laos every few months. The Hmong had nowhere to go. For them, this wasn't geopolitics. It was survival. Still, their courage stunned even hardened CIA agents. Vang Pao's men flew small prop planes into combat, rescued downed U.S. pilots, and held back North Vietnamese divisions far larger than their own. But the cost was terrible. By 1970, 1 out of every 10 Hmong in Laos had been killed. Entire generations of young men were gone. The war Washington denied. Back in Washington, the secret war didn't officially exist. When reporters asked about bombing raids, officials used phrases like interdiction operations and border support. President Lyndon B. Johnson and later Richard Nixon told the public the goal was to stop communist infiltration into South Vietnam. Few knew it meant destroying half of Laos. Even Congress was kept largely in the dark. Only a handful of senators had the security clearance to receive classified briefings, and even they got sanitized summaries. It was the perfect Cold War paradox, a democracy fighting an undeclared war in the name of defending democracy. 6. The turning point. By the early 1970s, as the Vietnam War dragged toward exhaustion, America began to pull back. Troops were coming home. Public opinion had turned. But in Laos, there was no withdrawal strategy, only promises. Vang Pao and his people had been told the US would never abandon them. That if things went wrong, America would protect the Hmong. Yet in 1973, when the Paris Peace Accords were signed and the US halted bombing campaigns, the CIA's presence in Laos evaporated overnight. One day, the planes came. The next day, they didn't. The Hmong looked to the sky, waiting for help that never came. 7. Collapse and exodus. Without American support, the Royal Lao government quickly crumbled. Communist Pathet Lao forces, backed by North Vietnam, swept through the countryside. Vang Pao and his remaining fighters retreated into the mountains, hiding families in caves as bombs fell above them. But the end was inevitable. In 1975, the same year Saigon fell, Laos was officially taken over by the Communists. Those who had fought for the Americans were hunted as traitors. Many were executed, others fled into the jungle or across the Mekong River into Thailand. Tens of thousands embarked on a desperate exodus. Entire families waded through muddy rivers under gunfire, carrying what little they could. Many drowned. Many starved. But some made it. By the late 1970s, waves of Hmong refugees arrived in the United States, in Minnesota, Wisconsin, California, carrying nothing but memories and grief. They had fought a war Americans didn't know existed. 8. The war that wouldn't die. In the US, the story faded quickly. The Vietnam War was already a national trauma, and Laos didn't fit into any official narrative. For decades, veterans who served there under civilian cover or CIA contracts couldn't even mention where they had been. Their medals listed other locations. Their missions were classified. Meanwhile, in Laos, the legacy of the bombing never ended. To this day, the country remains the most heavily bombed per capita in human history. Over 80 million unexploded bombs, cluster munitions the size of tennis balls, still litter the fields. Farmers hit them while plowing. Children mistake them for toys. Even now, half a century later, people are killed or maimed every week by a war that officially never happened. 9. The price of silence. The secret war in Laos exposed a deep contradiction in the American story. On one hand, it showcased ingenuity, loyalty, and bravery, the kind of covert heroism that intelligence officers romanticize. On the other, it revealed the human cost of fighting in shadows, where accountability disappears and allies are left behind. For the Hmong, the price was generations of loss. For the United States, it was a stain hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy. Years later, CIA veterans who had served in Laos admitted their guilt. Some testified before Congress to demand refugee rights for Hmong families. They said, "We made them fight for us. We cannot abandon them." But bureaucracy moves slower than regret. X. Memory and recognition. It wasn't until 1997, almost 25 years later, that the US officially acknowledged the secret war. That year, a memorial was dedicated at Arlington National Cemetery, a small granite monument, far from the main road, bearing these words. To the men and women who served in the secret war in Laos 1959 to 1975. To those who gave their lives and to those who remain missing. For many Hmong Americans, it was the first time their story had been spoken aloud by their adopted homeland. They came in thousands to the ceremony, veterans in worn uniforms, widows clutching photographs, children who had grown up hearing the word CIA whispered like a ghost. It wasn't closure. But it was something. 11. The Shadow Legacy. The secret war became a template for future conflicts. When Washington wanted influence without headlines, the CIA delivered. Laos proved that with money, local allies, and air power, America could wage full-scale war without Congress ever voting on it. From Central America to the Middle East, that lesson would echo. But it also left a question that still haunts policymakers. Can a democracy fight secret wars without losing part of its soul? For every covert success, there is a moral reckoning. Laos remains one of the most haunting because it asked ordinary people to believe in promises written in disappearing ink. 12. The human story beneath history. Think of a young child in 1970, standing on a hill as silver bombers roar overhead. He doesn't know the words communism or containment. He only knows that his father fights for invisible Americans who send food from the sky. Decades later, that same child may live in St. Paul or Fresno, speaking English, working hard, trying to explain to his own children why his family fled. He may point to scars, or silence, or memories that come back in dreams. That is the real legacy of the secret war, not policy papers, but human ghosts scattered across continents. 13. The truth comes out. In the 2000s, as declassified documents surfaced, Americans began to learn what had happened. PBS documentaries, memoirs, and survivor stories brought the invisible war into light. Journalists uncovered flight logs, CIA orders, and mission reports showing the scale of the operation. 580,000 bombing sorties. 2.5 million tons of ordnance. 350,000 dead or missing. And yet, even with those numbers, the most haunting part wasn't the scale, it was the silence. The secret war had been so secret that even its veterans struggled to prove they'd been there. For a nation that prides itself on freedom of information, this was the ultimate paradox, a democracy burying its own history. 14. The aftermath. Today, in the hills of northern Laos, villagers still dig craters left by American bombs. Some turn the twisted metal into spoons or roof sheets. Children grow up playing near old bomb shells painted like toys. For the Hmong diaspora in America, the war has become both wound and identity. Their elders fought and bled for a country that didn't remember them. But they rebuilt their lives anyway, opening shops, serving in the U.S. military, sending their kids to college. It is a story of pain, resilience, and silent pride. 15. Epilogue, the war that never was, but never ended. In the official histories of the Vietnam War, Laos is a footnote. But in truth, it was the testing ground for the modern American way of secret warfare, deniable, technological, and outsourced. To this day, the U.S. has never fully declassified the extent of its operations there. Perhaps because acknowledging them would mean facing what was lost, not only lives, but innocence. The secret war in Laos remains a mirror, reflecting the power and peril of American ambition. It shows how a nation can fight heroically, and yet lose something essential by hiding its own actions from its people. And it reminds us that history's quietest wars often leave the loudest echoes.